Rick Hind with you this morning, filling in for Adam Steer, and joining me in the studio for Chief on a Tuesday is Lia Finocchiaro. The CLP's first budget handed down last week with the debt situation to worsen, $14 billion, but attempts to increase own source revenue, like a rise in the taxes on profits for online bookmakers, bitterly opposed by the industry. When will the government look into changes to the BDR? Hospitality NT has told us this morning it's not working in its current form. And a budget cut for Indigenous Rangers, a group that was strongly supported by the CLP's last Federal Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Senator Nigel Scullion. What happens to real jobs on country with less money coming in? Get your questions in now to the Chief Minister, Lia Finocchiaro, 1300 057 222. Text in on 0487 991057. The Chief Minister joins us for Chief on a Tuesday in the ABC studios. There's plenty to discuss in the wake of the budget. Lia Finocchiaro, the last time I saw you was in person at the Italian Festival, down between the deck chair and the waterfront. Huge turnout. Dry season has arrived. How important are volunteers to an event like that, like Seabreeze, on at the same time?
Absolutely huge. And speaking of huge, I think when I saw you, you were in a very huge line for dinner. No, it's incredible. You know, you have people who come out in their hundreds to support an event. You know, they might not be Italian, for example. They might not have a connection to the Italian community, but they want to lend a hand. And it's a great time of the year. People are so excited with all of the festivals, and all of them require volunteers, and it's actually National Volunteer Week, so we're gearing up for that. And there'll be award ceremonies right across the territory, but if there's one thing Territorians do well, it's chip in and help out.
Absolutely. Bitterly cold in the studios this morning.
Yes.
We'll get straight to questions. One about the private maternity forum at the Mercure last night. Families were told outright, verbatim, that private maternity is dead in the NT. Neither the obstetricians expected to care for us nor the families themselves were consulted on what their needs were, and as a result, the birth in the public but pay as if it's private birth and the airport hotel room aftercare option is a wholly unsuitable substitute for private maternity on safety, comfort and financial grounds. This Mercure arrangement, considering that if you're in a hospital-like situation, you will stay in RDH, isn't this just a private hospital connected to public health care?
Yeah, I mean, it's an awful situation, and we feel absolutely terrible for the women and the families involved, and more broadly, it removes choice from the territory. But this is a decision made by HealthScope, and ultimately it rests with them. What we've done as a government is decided we had two choices. One was to let private health fall away and offer no alternatives, and that means every single woman in the territory would have to birth and stay at RDH, or they'd have to go interstate. We decided to step in and say, right, can we offer some sort of private-like service so that to give women and families choice and have that honoured by the private health providers. Now, it's not ideal, and I know people are very upset, but the service is safe. Of course, women will have to birth at RDH. They can do so with their private obstetrician. They can then have all of that care and support that you would get in hospital, but in a hotel setting or at home. But at the end of the day, the Northern Territory Government is not a private provider. We're just trying to make good of what is a bad situation. And, those community consultations we've been having, I've had good feedback from, I spoke to a woman over the weekend about the transition nurse who's really providing support. So it is a safe service, and it's not what they expected, and it might not be what they originally paid for. And, that's a matter for their private health insurer and HealthScope, but we're trying to plug a gap as best we can, being mindful that the territory is a public provider, not a private provider.
Well, the text is making that point. Shouldn't the NT government make it a priority to protect private healthcare in the short term until a new operator takes over if they want to grow the NT, as they say? If HealthScope is putting its private hospitals up for sale, does the territory need to step in and fill that gap?
Well, we don't know if that is the case. So they've just decided, what we do know is they've cut their private service, but they continue to run the Darwin Hospital. So the Health Minister is writing to the Federal Minister today to put them on notice that we must have private services in the Territory. If Healthscope are going to take that next step, we need the Commonwealth to be stepping in, because that choice is very, very important for people, and we can't have we can't lose a private health system for the size of the Territory and even Northern Australia, who really rely on our services.
He's asking for $36 million. That is a lot of money for providing a health service. The hospital says it's providing a good service right now. But I went out to RDH yesterday. I had a look. That is a super old building. Is the problem that we're just trying to do too much in a building that's just not built for it?
It is a super old building. I was born there, and I'm no spring chicken anymore, Rick. But look, it's still our tertiary hospital. It is our key functioning emergency hospital. So it has a critical role to play. Does it need improvements and enhancements? Absolutely. And that's something that's being done. We've certainly asked for the Commonwealth for that money. But there's two issues we're sort of conflating here. One is that private maternity has been withdrawn by Healthscope. The other is speculating on whether or not they pull out of the Territory entirely. So to plug the gap for pregnant women, we're trying to provide a private-like service in a public setting. And in terms of requiring private health here in the Territory, we are absolutely putting our foot down and saying to the Commonwealth, this is not good enough. You need a plan B.
Northern Territory Parliament resumes today with debate on a proposed tax increase for the gambling industry on the agenda. You're proposing to double the tax imposed on gross profit for gambling operators, most of which are based in the Territory. It's expected to bring in a further $13 million a year. The Greens member for Nightcliff wanted the cap to be scrapped, but the industry has opposed the increase and has described it as a short-term revenue grab. Is it?
Well, it's really important we bring in revenue, but we have to change our tax settings to make sure we're really competitive. So we want those jobs. We want those outlets providing local jobs here, and there are hundreds of local jobs in this industry. But we can't be giving people a free ride either. So we're doubling the cap to make sure that we can increase our revenue while still remaining highly competitive. And so, of course, the industry doesn't like it. No one likes, paying tax, but I think less Territorians feel sorry for gambling companies when it comes to tax rises.
Well, when this kind of tax increase was proposed previously, the gambling industry said they could leave the Territory. Is that actually an empty threat because of the arrangements that you've got here? We are the de facto regulators of this industry because it's lightly regulated here compared to elsewhere. Yeah,
we have a fantastic system. We still believe we remain the most competitive jurisdiction in the country. So the way we regulate, the offering that's provided as a whole is a really good place to do business. And that's our aspiration for every industry. We're really working hard to reduce red tape, change our regulatory frameworks so that, as part of our economic growing the Territory plan, we're really focused on making the Territory the best place to do business. So we haven't taken the decision lightly, but at the end of the day, we have, we're looking at a $12 billion debt. We've got to pay that somehow. And so we've got to make sure that if companies are operating in the Territory, they're paying their fair share, and we think we've struck that right balance of being highly competitive, encouraging that investment, whilst also making sure we're getting Territorians value for money.
You're listening to 105.7 ABC Radio Darwin. Rick Hind with you. On Chief on a Tuesday, Lia Finocchiaro is in the ABC studios. Lia Finocchiaro, one issue that people are losing patience on is voluntary assisted dying. Mm-hmm. A new inquiry to be conducted by the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee, chaired by Dr. Tanzil Rahman, the member for Fong Lim. That's due to report in September. Justine Davis, the independent member for Johnston, has people in her ear about VAD night and day. She's okay with another inquiry?
If there's a feeling that there's a need for more conversation to be had so that we can make sure that we develop law that everyone can come along with us on, then that's okay.
Steve-O in Waddell, though, is facing his end-of-life decisions now, as he told Liz Travascus last week.
I don't want to be a burden, I don't want to make a mess, and I don't want to make a fuss. I just want a quick and clean end.
Now, he's also texted us this morning, given that VAD would reduce suicide, hospital beds and duration of agony for some patients, can the Chief Minister please facilitate VAD legislation? That's from Steve-O in Waddell. Why not legislate now? You've had an inquiry reported last year. Isn't that enough?
Look, we don't think it is enough. And so by having the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee go out and look at the nuts and bolts is a really important next step. Now, the original report was consulted on up and down the Stuart Highway, basically in the main towns. It wasn't taken out remote. And Aboriginal people are very important stakeholders in this conversation. It has to be respectful. It has to be inclusive. It's a polarising issue. Some people are very for, very against, and others are, couldn't care less. So it's one of those issues that we have to work through as a community. And so this process will end in September. It's not drawn out, but it will focus on reaching remote Territorians. It will focus on looking very specifically at our own territory nuanced needs, picking up on the work that was done in the report. And if the committee decide after all their consultations that there is a pathway forward, then they will make that recommendation with drafting instructions as part of their report.
So once the report's produced, if the answer is yes, then you will be pushing forward with that legislation?
Yeah, if their report comes back with drafting instructions, that will then be put into the Parliament. Parliamentary Council would then be drafting legislation, and it would be based on obviously the work of the previous report, this report, and all of the information they received, and it would put a pathway forward. We've always said it will be a conscience vote for our side in the Parliament. I'm not sure where Labor sit on this issue, but at the end of the day, what I'm most focused on is making sure everyone feels that they've had a chance to contribute and be part of this debate. And I think, VAD is not all born equal. There's different ways to do it, different jurisdictions. There's some really tricky conversations to be had around, should it apply to children, people with dementia? So those issues need to be fleshed out, and they're difficult conversations to have. And I just want this to be a very inclusive, respectful consideration right across the territory. And I encourage everyone to be involved. If you're passionate about this, please don't hold back, have the opportunity to be part of it.
We spoke on 105.7 ABC Radio Darwin to vocal opponent Nicholas Lay, the NT Director of the Australian Christian Lobby.
Education and stuff and programs like that aren't going to overcome that. There is still going to be this fear of going to health services, and palliative care in particular. Palliative care have had to do a lot of work over the years to wind back the fear after this initially came back.
Isn't it the job of the NT government to make sure that people aren't afraid of using health services but for fear of VAD? Isn't that exactly what the government should be doing to shore up VAD so it applies to the people who want it?
No, I actually think Nicholas is spot on the money there. It is really important, and particularly we don't want to undermine people's confidence in the health system, and this is why going out remote is so important as well, because we can't have people withdrawing from hospital, withdrawing from palliative care because they think something might happen to them. So again, this is why this consultation is so important. It's to raise awareness. It's to really understand those nuances that we have here in the Territory, and that is why this next piece of work is key. He's
opposed either way, and he said that to us. But there have been 7 times this has been raised and debated in around Australia. It happens literally every other jurisdiction except the one that innovated in this space. This was the first jurisdiction that ever had voluntary assisted dying legislation. And we get several texts every time we mention this from people whose family members are dealing with a disease right now. They're keen for voluntary assisted dying legislation yesterday. Why are we going through another process when we've seen what's happened interstate?
Because, again, the Territory is unique in how we will need to deliver our services if that is what ends up happening. And I don't want to preempt obviously all of that consultation that's yet to take place. But there are unique specific things that apply to us, and other jurisdictions entertain other things that the Territorians might not have appetite for. I raised those 2 key issues earlier. For a lot of people, that would be a deal breaker, and rightfully so. So, it's a tricky situation. I appreciate very much that there are people out there suffering and loved ones, and people want to bring closure to this issue, and I'm very respectful and mindful of that. And I've spoken to people myself on both sides of this ledger, and I've had loved ones suffer, and we're all human at the end of the day. But I have a responsibility as Chief Minister. We have a responsibility as a government, and we will make sure that this is a proper process where everyone is heard, where the real issues are fleshed out, and that's our commitment.
Let's move on. It's 8:45 on 105.7 ABC Radio Darwin. Stuart Knowles appointed as the Territory Coordinator. What was the process? Why was such a contentious position not recruited for publicly?
Well, I don't think it is a contentious position.
You have to legislate to create the Territory Coordinator.
That's right, because it's an entire piece of economic reform. I mean, we are so proud and excited by what we've been able to do, and we just can't wait to see where this takes the Territory. It's a really key part of our rebuilding the economy strategy. And so I appointed Stuart Knowles as the interim coordinator. I think it was about November last year. He's been doing all of that interim work of the consultation, getting the bill together, pulling the team together within government. And now that we've passed the bill, obviously there's criteria in the bill. So he's been assessed against the criteria, and those checks have been done. And then he's been appointed by the administrator. That's the process. And at the end of the day, he's an incredibly important part, as is his team, in that real focus on economic development for the Territory. So we know people don't, there are some people who are concerned, and that's fine. But at the end of the day... But
isn't there a little bit of a pattern here, though? The new head of Territory Legal Aid, the chair, the board members resigned when the AG chose someone they didn't even interview. So they didn't think that the person who is going to head Territory Legal Aid was worth an interview. Do we have a problem recruiting people to senior positions? It seems like it's not what you know, it's who you know. And is that a real break on our ability to bring talented people here, as is everyone's intention from all the public comment?
Absolutely not. Some positions are appointed, others are recruited. The Legal Aid Act, for example, specifically says that the Attorney General appoints the person. Now, if those three board members didn't feel like Ms Vermaad met the mark to them, that's their prerogative. But at the end of the day...
It's their expert opinion, aren't you?
Well, I mean,
to their expert opinion?
I think you've got to be careful throwing around the words expert. Three people were pulled together to create a panel. What the Attorney General's after is change, not status quo. And that's what our government is after, change, not the same. And so this is a change management decision by the Attorney General. Ms Vermaad has a wealth of experience, and she's worked in legal aid and NAJA and all these other types of areas, DPP, for example. So she has the breadth of understanding, but this was a deliberate change. And if those three people walk away as a result of it, that's entirely their prerogative, and we'll fill those positions and move forward. But we've funded legal aid properly for the first time in eternity, increasing it from about 3.3 mil to 5.5 because we recognise the important role they play, and we have to make sure legal aid is strong and enduring into the future, which it wasn't prior to us coming to government. So we make no apologies for making important decisions to bring this forward, because if we don't get legal aid right, victims will not get justice, and we need an efficient justice system delivering quick justice for our victims and for perpetrators as well.
What's happening with the review of BDR? Kathy Simmons says the BDR is not working. Here's what she told us this morning.
85% of all alcohol consumed in the Territory comes from bottle shops. It's not being consumed on premise. It's being consumed off premise, in houses or in parks. So it doesn't seem very efficient to put it on premise. How do you buy a bottle of wine for the table at the restaurant? Does everyone who gets a glass have to get scanned? How do you buy a drink for your girlfriend if you're out having a post-work drink? Like, what do you do? It would change the lifestyle.
Is BDR in venues still on the table?
I don't think I'm not sure if it's come out as part of the review. It's certainly not something we're looking at, and I think Catherine summed it up perfectly well. I mean, 85% of alcohol is from takeaway. That's where we see a lot of the harm, and I don't think it's fair to impose on Territorians everyone at a dinner table having to rock up to the bar to scan their licence when they're just having dinner. I mean, we've got to be targeting alcohol-fuelled harm, not just the use of alcohol. I mean, it's ridiculous, and we've already strengthened the public drinking laws to give police better powers, and there's more work that needs to be done. But alongside our BDR review is also our alcohol mandatory treatment public consultation. And so we're really excited this year to be sitting down with key players in this space, so people delivering alcohol services, and look at how can we make sure we've got a mandated program for people who've absolutely given up on themselves, people who are causing alcohol-fueled violence and harm. They're the people we have to target. We have to change behaviour and make people well. And if we can do that, while we're dealing with the root causes, then we'll actually get somewhere. But targeting people having dinner at a restaurant or a pub, that's not where alcohol-fuelled harm is.
So the BDR won't be introduced into venues?
I couldn't imagine it, Rick. I really couldn't.
Here's Kathy Simmons talking about pallies.
We're really hopeful that these new investments in police free up those resources that we need to see to get more pallies out there, because that would be just fantastic, I think, for our industry and for, the safety and security of patrons and staff, which continues to be our top priority.
Our texters in Katherine don't muck around. Katherine urgently needs pallies. Do they have enough? Are you going to have more pallies in Katherine?
So Labor actually virtually got rid of pallies. So the pallies were offered the transition to constable course, of which most of them did. So we actually have most of our pallies are now full constables. So we are having constables on bottle shops where we can. This is an operational police decision. I know in Alice they're not doing too bad, but in Katherine it's been much more difficult to have that full coverage. Licensees have a responsibility in this space as well to be making sure they're upholding their RSA and all of those other liquor license requirements that they have, and to have they can pay for private security as well. This doesn't all rest on government's shoulders. But our police have to make a tough call. Do they stand on a bottle shop, or do they go out and respond to crime? And there's always going to be, a rub there, because people say, well, if they stand on the bottle shop, it'll stop crime. And that's partly true. But when people call 000, who do they want to see straight away? A police officer saving them. So again, we're focused really on getting police through the college. We're about 53 police up in our numbers net, so that because we've brought down the attrition rate, which is fantastic. We've got more police in the college now, and I think we'll be graduating several dozen more over the course of this year, and that will all really help. We've got about 16 police heading to Katherine in the not too distant future as well, which will also help that town. And so it's, there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot that has been done, and we'll just have to continue to push really hard. Now,
we don't want to make you late for Parliament. One question on Indigenous Rangers. One of the biggest supporters of Ranger groups, he fought really hard for more money for their programs over many years, was CLP Senator Nigel Scullion. Remote First Nations workers doing vital work in real jobs on biosecurity, on border, on fisheries protection. Why is there less money in the NT budget for rangers when spending is going up almost everywhere else?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this. So the Aboriginal Ranger groups are funded by the Commonwealth Government, by the federal government. Labor was funding them a little bit and then stopped their funding. And this is what Labor don't want to talk about. They're pointing the finger at us, but at the end of the day, they had $0 for Aboriginal Rangers. So we've continued through with that. That does not stop them, though, from accessing government work. So, for example, for doing work in our national parks, on our waterways, on our rivers, on our coastlines, all of that type of work. But people can rest assured that they do receive Commonwealth funding, and that's how they were originally structured in the first place.
And we've just got another question about Mercure, the information session last night, which many expectant mums attended. And there's a question here about the access to a private obstetrician for their birth in RDH after May. Will still need to pay top private hospital premiums for at least 12 months prior to the birth, just so that private OBs can use RDH. This seemed to be news to the Health Minister and the NT Health CEO last night. How is that still news to those senior figures?
I think perhaps that was that person's interpretation. I mean, this again is a conversation with the private health providers as well, and the obstetricians. They charge their out-of-pocket expenses, but us utilising Healthscope's private hospital was not an option. They would not let us do it. So we had no choice. Ideally, if we could have said, right, we'll take over your wing, let us run it, but that was not on the table. So again, to those women, my heart goes out to them. It's a really special, important time in your life, and the last thing you want is someone changing your birth plan and your expectation and what you've been planning for. But the options we have on the table are safe, genuine options. If you want to continue down your private pathway, there is two options there. If you want to just put that aside and move through the public system, of course, they will all be waiting there with open arms for you. It's certainly not ideal, but we're making the best of what is a bad situation left to the Territory by Healthscope, who've simply just walked away. And we know that the Mercure or the home visits will give you that midwifery support. It will give you the food and the support you need so that you're not having to do all those household jobs when you've just got your new bub. And that's what we want. We want those first few days to be really special, obviously recovering, bonding with the young one, introducing the new baby to other siblings and grandparents and all of the wonderful joys of having a child. So
could it really hurt our sell to people looking to move to Northern Australia that you won't get private maternity services here to the extent that you would in other cities that we compete against, like Townsville, for instance?
Yeah, I came out straight away and said this is a symptom of having a weak economy. And I know some people might not make the link, but at the end of the day, it's straightforward. That hospital used to birth 800 babies a year and now they birth 270. They've made an economic decision to cut it because it's not making them money. Now, I'm not saying that's right, but that's the reality of what the decision they've made. If we were still having 800 babies born a year because our economy was strong and people were moving to the territory, none of us would be having this conversation. That hospital would be humming. And that's part of the reason why we're making big decisions like Territory Coordinator, because if we don't grow our economy now and grow our population, what other services are next? You know, we've seen Channel 9 pull out of Darwin. We've seen lots of companies pack up and move, and that is all symptomatic of supply and demand. And so our focus on growing our economy is not just about making sure people have great jobs and great opportunities. It's about making sure we have choice in service delivery across the board so that people can enjoy living here.
Lia Finocchiaro, Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, thanks for making time for us on a parliamentary sitting day.
It's great. Love to be with you all. Take care and enjoy this freezing weather. It's fantastic.
As each day begins,
Get the